Well, despite everything that is going on, we have to keep on keeping on. And that's what the next conversation is about. Critical infrastructure development and protection. Of course, it's not unknown to us that critical infrastructures are the backbone of modern interconnected economies. So the disruption of key systems and essential services such as telecommunications, energy or water supply, transportation or finance, it can cause substantial economic damage. And that's not what we want right now. If anything, we want to be stronger, not weaker. So to take a look at this topic, at least peel the lid open, we have with us Gbolahan Olajide, who is Executive Director at DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Also joining us is Ikechukwu Namani, who is President, Association of Telecommunication Companies of Nigeria, ATCON. He joins us virtually. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Okay. Well, perhaps to begin, Mr. Olajide, the first question would be for people to even understand what we are talking about here. When we talk about critical infrastructure, what are the things that we are talking about here? You know, to a large extent, when we talk about infrastructure, people are looking at the hard infrastructure, roads, rails, airports, and stuff like that. So, but we seem to be talking about something different here.
Well, infrastructure could be physical, which is those hard ones you spoke about. There's also the social infrastructure. Both of them are important. For the physical infrastructure, the impact on the economy is direct. Whatever you do in that space starts to drop into your economy. For the social ones, it's indirect. You build people, people build economy. That is what the word social infrastructure was. But both are quite essential for the economy to do well.
Well, Mr. Namani, what are we talking about here? Perhaps a better understanding from a telecommunication company's perspective?
Yeah, from the telecom perspective, when we talk of infrastructure, we're talking of basically all the elements or equipment or facilities that enables the subscribers to be able to use telecom services. So these are mainly back-end equipment. So beyond what is called the subscriber device, like your phones, tablets, and the rest of it, your laptop that you use to access telecom services, at the service providers end, we are talking of things like the switches, the routers, the physical building, the fiber optics networks, the microwave radios, the base stations, the data centers. You know, these are the core part of the network that without those things being available, no service can be rendered to the subscriber. So the subscriber would not be able to use any of the telecom service if these other core infrastructure are not in place or functioning well. So basically, the closest we see is maybe when we move along the street and we see the cell towers and the rest of them. But there are some others we don't get to see, like if fibers are laid underground, you literally don't get to see it on a day-to-day basis. But at the end of the day, these are all what makes the subscribers able to use telecom facility that is available.
Mr. Olajide, the whole world is now tending to use artificial intelligence to protect most of these things. We seem to be lagging behind in this respect, don't we? If you look at, for instance, that train tragedy, one would have expected that AI would have been used to protect that kind of infrastructure, particularly since we borrowed a humongous amount of money to set it up.
The security of critical infrastructure is a subset of the bigger security environment. Now, what has happened in more structured environment is that you prepare the institutional framework for making this happen. There's a legal framework, and then there's a financing framework, because those things must be funded. So if you take a legal framework, look at Australia. Australia has a law called the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. Now, that is a legal framework. What it helps you to do is give it a focus. So you start from defining what exactly are critical infrastructure. Why should we protect them? What are the risks? So you analyze the kind of risk we're trying to protect. Then it defines how it should be protected. If you go to the institutional framework, in the US, you have the US Federal Protective Service. The duty of the US Federal Protective Service is to protect US infrastructure. You have even things like the British Transport Police in the UK. Their duty is to focus on the transport infrastructure, ensure that nothing goes wrong along that pathway. You have the Amtrak Police, who are more interested in the commercial transport side of the US. So the institutional framework must be there. In most countries, they are located either under the Ministry of Interior or what you call Home Affairs. And there are even technical committees and agencies of government whose responsibility is to focus on the protection of this critical asset. We do not have that structure. The AI that you spoke about will lean on this kind of structures. It will come. It won't stand on its own. So without those fundamental structures being in place, we are not, if you observe, when this incident happened, who could you actually point at? Was it the Nigerian Railway? Was it the minister in charge of transport? We were lost because there were no direct responsibility of anybody to have managed that process. We must put in place those structures so that we can deploy AI, other forms of technology to secure our critical infrastructure. But nations are paying attention to that.
It is clear who is directly in charge of the railway system. It's the
Correct.
Ministry of Transportation and the charged affairs, so to speak, of the Nigeria Railway Corporation is the Nigeria Railway Infrastructure in Nigeria is the Nigeria Railway Corporation. So even in a situation where a state like Lagos has its own metro line or whatever lines you want to call them, they still have that conversation with the state, with the Nigeria Railway Corporation to ensure that they do it right. So that one is clear. So is that saying then that there are gaps that those who are coming up with this critical infrastructure should fill in terms of protecting those infrastructure for sustainability?
There are gaps in our infrastructure protection. You spoke about the Ministry of Transportation. I've given the example of the US and the UK. When you're locating critical infrastructure protection, it is not located in those ministries. It is located in ministries that have the competence for security provision. So when you look at the Ministry of Interior being responsible in some country, Home Affairs being responsible, they're not the transport ministry in those countries.
Okay.
But because they have responsibility for internal security, it is put in their charge. Now, they will now be working hand in hand. There's a handshake with like the Ministry of Transport that you mentioned as to how these things will work out.
Okay. Well, let me ask Mr. Namani, aping some of the things that you heard Mr. Olojede talk about here now, allow me to pick on the telecom sector in this whole critical infrastructure discussion and ask you if and how vulnerable is, if that is the case, the telecom sector in Nigeria in terms of protection of critical infrastructure.
Okay, time. So riding on what Mr. Bolahan just said, the truth is currently in Nigeria, the party responsible for the policies, guidelines on Nigeria critical infrastructure is actually the NSA's office. There is some policy document being developed and structure being put in place to solidify what they're already doing. I know this because we are directly involved with them in terms of the telecom sector critical infrastructure policies and all. So the NSA's office is actually currently the one in charge of maintaining and protecting the critical infrastructure within Nigeria. So that body exists. I know some work is currently going on with respect to that. Now, on a broader scope, we need to understand that there are layers of security that needs to be looked at. Like the AI you mentioned, there are new technologies that exist. When, as you roll out new infrastructure, especially based on Internet of Things, this technology embedded in it to monitor it. But you need to understand that there's a difference between monitoring and equipment and when somebody intentionally goes to vandalize or destroy it, which is pretty much like an act of terrorism. Globally, no matter which part of the world it is, there is no infrastructure that you can protect other than somebody physically going to guard it when there is an intentional attempt to destroy it as a form of terrorist act. Globally, it's not just restricted to Nigeria. Even if you escalate to the war currently going on in Ukraine, you see that some critical infrastructure is being willfully damaged because there's a war going on in that location. So we need to understand that once it comes to vandalism and destruction of critical infrastructure, once it is a willful attempt to destroy, whatever parameters you put in place in form of AI, whatever, that is out of the window. You need to physically protect them or have policies in place to physically protect them against somebody willfully coming to damage them. In the telecom space, we see this happening a lot, sometimes both willfully and sometimes by mistake. We've seen cases where fibers have been dug up the ground doing road construction. We don't believe that when a road contractor goes and in the course of doing their work, they damage the fiber, it's a willful destruction. We just feel it's something that is done out of ignorance and lack of coordination between the agency that have awarded the contract and the contractor themselves being diligent in their work. So that is not willful, but it happens. A lot of fiber is being damaged purely due to road construction going on. But we've also seen cases of willful destruction where people intentionally identify that there is fiber on the ground, goes to dig it up because they want to sell it for financial gain. So we've also seen that going on in the telecom space where it is willful destruction for financial gain. Then we've also seen cases where it is being destroyed as a part of the general destruction of infrastructure within a community as an act of social disobedience, terrorism, or call it whatever it is. So in all these cases, telecom infrastructure is being vandalized, is being destroyed, and what we are saying and what we'll be pushing through the policy coming out from the NSA is that there should be a concerted effort, a willful effort to actually protect this using the security agencies so that it is done not by expecting the private sector, which is currently what we are doing. Each of us have some security parameters we've put in place to secure some of these assets. But sometimes you get overwhelmed. Sometimes it's not actually your core job activity as an operating company to also provide security. We are expressing the same thing with power supply. It's not the duty of a telecom service provider to be a power generating company, but we find ourselves doing the same thing because power is not readily available. So unfortunately, that is the state of the nation, and it's not sustainable because quality of service cannot be guaranteed. Cheap service cannot be guaranteed with the current status quo. So something has to be done about it.
Mr. Namani, you spoke about willful destruction and then destruction out of ignorance. I was just thinking, do you not also think that maybe our populace is not not sometimes sophisticated enough to understand the usefulness of these things? I mean, and what comes to my mind readily is the destruction of the I don't know how to describe, the railings on the bridges that people go and remove at night to go and make spoons And they have said that it's a result of poverty. Does the government not also have it, should the government not have it as a priority to educate the populace? These things are put there for your own good. So it is also in your own interest to keep an eye on them on government's behalf.
You are very, very correct. And this is where engaging the community and making the local community feel that this infrastructure belongs to them, not necessarily to the service provider or even to the government that has implemented it. Once you feel that this belongs to you, this is for your own good, then the community has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that these infrastructures are protected. But there's even a second layer of it, which is making it not financially viable when somebody goes to vandalize a bridge, for instance, to take some things to go and sell. If the policies are put in place where once you are caught or whoever is supposed to buy it off you realizes that this is something stolen, this is something that is not just stolen but is actually going to lead to potential loss of life if that bridge intentionally eventually collapses over time because the foundation has been stolen away, then we all owe it as citizens to watch out for each other and not just allow those that are greedy to have their way. But beyond that, there should also be a very strong legal and regulatory process that once this happens and people are apprehended, they are used as scapegoats to show others that this is not the right way to live. But it cuts across all sectors of the economy. Remember, when somebody goes and digs up fiber to sell, somebody is buying that fiber. If there's no buyer, then there's no incentive for somebody to continue doing it. So we all have to realize that this is for common good and we all have to work together. I'm one of those that don't believe that government can fix all the problems in the country. There is also a role for the citizens and for the private sector, all working together to solve some of these problems. But you are 100% correct. There is need for more awareness, more enlightenment. But from what I know, you would always see people that just think the wrong way in every society. For that, no matter how, it's not that they're not even aware. Some of them are actually aware of what they are doing. For those kind of people, there must be policies to address it beyond educating them.
Well, Mr. Olojede, as the conversation progressed and Mr. Nnamani began to speak, one of the questions that came to my mind is getting the buy-in of the people. Sometimes I think it's, for instance, I try to decrypt, such issues as this. I mean, you are in a corporate organization. You are employed to do a particular job, but you know that your job, your input is someone else's output, your output is someone else's input, and all of that. Do you think we've been able to persuade ourselves as a nation that our output or input as citizens is government's input or output?
I don't think we have done well with that. The sense of ownership of communities, of citizens, of the critical infrastructure that have been provided for their own use, that sense of ownership is not actually there.
What do you think made that to be? There are those who reference back in time the mass mobilization for social re-engineering and all of that, MAMSAD.
All those things worked. Some of the songs of those days, I still have it in my head. That was how intense those campaigns were. But they have all gone underground. Nobody is hearing anything from National Orientation Agency, from all those major campaigns that we had in those days. They're not there. So the citizens' awareness, the public education side of things have failed totally. And if we don't wake up that side, the question is, how do we create those awareness that she mentioned and Nnamani also mentioned?
I think
we must fix those.
For me, Mr. Olojede, it also begs the question of how committed the private sector can be to PPPs if they are not sure that their investments will be protected. Mr. Nnamani, let me ask you that one. There are those who, how can the private sector be interested or happy to go all out and put all of their eggs into this PPP when they are not sure of protection of their investments?
This answer is very simple. Only those that truly believe in this country long term are currently investing. We've driven away a lot of potential good foreign direct investment exactly because of this problem, because the foreigners don't have the patience and they have alternative use of their funds to other countries where they feel the fund will be more secure. Even if the potential yield is higher in the country, many people are walking away from whatever that potential yield is because they just feel that it's going to be an effort in futility. So it's hurting us from all aspects of life. The citizens are actually suffering without realizing that they are suffering from this situation because a lot of foreign direct investment is not coming into the country because people are concerned that if you invest, your infrastructure or your investment is not secured, you could lose everything due to disruption of your facility, sometimes intentionally. That is even worse situation. So we are suffering from it. What we do today is that some of us that are still investing is because we feel we have no other option. We are Nigerians, there's no other place to go to. This is our country. So we have to keep investing. And we are also optimistic that status quo will not remain the same, that a time is going to come when the orientation of the population will change and things will be better. That is the only reason and the only way you will get somebody commit good resource into the country as of today. Well, we are suffering from it, and that is why I said status quo is not sustainable. The country is losing a lot because of this.
Okay, you talked about some policies coming up the other time. Are there protection mechanisms in that policy? We'll talk about the funding of the policy, but are there protection parameters in that policy for critical infrastructure?
Yes, if the national critical infrastructure policy that is being developed is actually passed into law, there is actually some protections already included in it, where any facility that is identified as critical infrastructure receives the level of protection from the government that currently does not exist today. Today, it's been left for private sector or individuals to sort out themselves and fix their problem. Now, government would, for instance, create adequate security, state finance security or government finance security around some of these. Policies would be in place to actually dictate where a critical infrastructure is about being vandalized, and then effort is taken to prevent that. But let me tell you the one that is even more important. Do you know today, some state and local government are actually disrupting critical infrastructures from performing, especially where there is dispute about multiple taxation and the rest of it. As we're speaking today, there are some cell-site operators-based stations that has been locked up by some state government because of dispute over multiple taxation, a situation where some arm of the same government have already collected a tax and a different arm or a different unit want to collect similar tax, and the operators are saying, no, this is multiple taxation. And guess what? They will come and seal up your cell site, seal up your data centers, seal up your operating center, purely because they want to twist you to pay that levy. So, and this is where I'm talking about that there is the ones that are done ignorantly. There's one that is willful, being done by state and local government as we speak. So if we look at it from, private sector people or the citizens are ignorant, they are creating this disruption, what do you now say when it's being done by a state government or being done by a local government? We can't say they are ignorant purely because they want to increase their IGRO, and they feel that if we twist the operators, if we seal up their operations, they will be forced to pay this levy, which, as far as the service provider is concerned, is an illegal levy. Anything that is viewed to be legal levy is paid for by the service providers. But when it's under dispute, and then you now say, the only way I can force them to pay is to go and seal up their site or twist them, by default, you are no different from the terrorists sealing up the same site. Unfortunately, I have to use such a hard word, but that is really what it is. At the end of the day, we are talking of disruption to service delivery, to efficient service delivery. Okay. So that is what we are dealing with at this time. Okay. Hopefully, when this policy comes in, State and local government will not have the right to do that because it's included in that policy that a critical infrastructure must not be disrupted from functioning, no matter the reason or the excuse being used.
Well,
that is one of the protection that we know is there that currently we are not benefiting from because that law has not been passed by the National Assembly.
Well, let's just hope that the tax harmonization program plan that's accommodated in the tax dialogue that recently held will accommodate some of these issues that you have raised. But Mr. Olojede, do you think in terms of inclusion on protection of critical infrastructure, do you think that angle of host communities in the Petroleum Industry Act could also help in that regard, where some of the infrastructure or the petroleum infrastructure is literally placed on as a responsibility of the host communities. It's your job to protect it. Otherwise, you may some kind of denials will come.
It has to be in the mix. Though the question will be how effective has that been, even with the oil installation that we spoke about? Mm-hmm. Oil theft has not been as high as what we currently have. Meanwhile, we have that policy in place.
Law, actually.
So at some point, it's possible that the people who were put in charge have also been helping themselves or compromising on the roles that have been ascribed to them. And that is why we can have oil theft going up even as we commit the infrastructure to the locals. It's one of the things that we cannot afford to push aside. The communities must be involved in the protection of infrastructure passing through their communities or for which is in their environment. We cannot take it. But we cannot also focus on that alone. It's a mix of measures that will determine how effective we will get on this matter. And that is why the policy level issue is very critical. You define all this critical infrastructure, you define the risk, the various levels of risk that are there, and how you plan to mitigate each of this risk. And the solution is usually a cocktail, not a single solution.
You talked about a mix, you talked about a cocktail. What are some of the other components or ingredients in this cocktail?
Government must be actively involved. I spoke earlier about how there are dedicated agencies of government in some other parts of the world that are responsible for protecting certain infrastructure. That is government on one side. There is the community in that mix. There is the citizen, the users of this infrastructure. They have a role too. If you see something, say something. There is the technology side of things. So it's a cocktail. Everybody must play their roles. And these roles are harmonized at the level of the policy.
Well, you talked about, just 1 second, Alaram, apologies. You talked about the place of technology the other time. Just last year, the federal government advocated the use of AI in the protection of critical infrastructure across the country, stressing the need for more awareness, research, and development towards the protection of this infrastructure. So the government is saying exactly what we are saying. Who is supposed to champion this?
Government. If government need to now co-opt the private sector, then bring them in. They will respond to you. Because if we're talking of infrastructure, the primary responsibility is that of the government. If you want the private sector to even do the funding for you, they will do it, but you have to call them because the ownership resides in you. It is at your discretion that you can decide to, let me concession this to you as a private sector. So the champion is the government. Okay. Of course, at the private sector level, we can all advise, like we're doing right here now. We can advise the government, this is what we think, this is what we think. But an advice remains an advice. I can decide to take it or not.
A la ex-president OBJ, you are my advisor, but nothing says I must listen to your advice. Okay. Do you think that we're deploying technology enough in this endeavor?
No, we're not.
But the technology is mainly available. So why are we not availing ourselves of it?
I don't think we're committed to it that much. Maybe we're not even conscious of it. Don't forget that we're just in the act of rebuilding our infrastructure. A whole lot of infrastructure from electricity to road to rail have been abandoned for decades. Now we're bringing up roads projects, we're bringing up rail projects, we're thinking of, doing something about electricity. So all those, they are new. But as we're coming into that space, we must also be thinking, how do we secure them? One of the main problems of modern economic system is how integrated these things are. And the visionary who is sitting at the top there must be able to see through how these things are interconnected. Otherwise, he will act in silos and without being conscious of the effect of what he's doing on several other things. This is one of the problems we have with deploying technology. The technology is there. If we want it, we can get it. But we have to be conscious of it and go for it.
Well, Mr. Namani, you both, gentlemen, have sidestepped or spoken around funding protection of infrastructure. So let's go into it. How do we fund this protection? And perhaps to add into the mix, is there a role for insurance in protection of critical infrastructure?
From the private sector side, every infrastructure you put out there, you have to insure. So we are actually currently paying insurance premium on all the infrastructure we have out there. You don't have an option because it's a given that if you don't do that and your infrastructure is damaged, then potentially you run financial loss and you may be out for a long time in terms of a service provider. So as we're speaking, we insure every infrastructure we put out there at a very high cost. The problem is when this is vandalized and those that vandalize it are caught, there is no fallback to make them pay for it, because one of the policies we've pushed out to the relevant agencies is that if you, for instance, you are awarding a road construction contract to an entity, include in that contract that they should take insurance in case they damage any of the telecom infrastructure on the road. And that way, if the contractor is careless enough to damage it, he is responsible to fix it. What happens today is that once your infrastructure, especially fiber, is damaged, because you want to quickly restore service to the subscribers, you have to go fix it yourself. Sometimes you don't even go back to the insurance you've taken on it. You have to, because it takes a long process for them to process it. So you end up actually going to pay double to restore it when it was damaged by a third party that should be held responsible. So that insurance is there. We take it up. Unfortunately, the only people that are paying for all these damages are the service providers. Now, you could say, which if we are realistic about it, at the end of the day, this probably gets passed on to the subscribers one way or the other in terms of higher tariff. So whether we like it or not, the common man on the street is the one paying for all this. And it's unfair and it should not be so. There should be a policy and the process where those that willfully damage infrastructure are held responsible and they pay. Because once you start doing that, people will be more careful. People will be more careful. And even when it's a willful destruction and you find them and somebody knows there's a financial cost for damaging infrastructure, people will actually be more careful and think twice before they actually go to damage some of this infrastructure. So the answer is that today, the only people paying for it are those that are implementing the infrastructure. Whether this gets passed on to the end users or not is a different story. If one is to look at it, but something tells me at the end of the day, it's being passed on to the end user, but it should not be so. Okay. If people do the right thing, there is already a need to put more infrastructure, which is what we are talking about. Now, somebody goes out there to destroy the ones that are already put in place. How does that make sense? We don't have the infrastructure. The ones we have that people have invested in, people are destroying it and getting away with it. Yes. It's not right, and it's not good for the long-term growth of the country. One other part, because I need to kind of emphasize this because that's come up a few times, which is using technology to monitor these things. Believe me, if a fiber is cut today, the technology exists to know exactly where it is cut. But the process is, by the time you go to restore it, you are restoring it at your own cost because the person that has cut it has moved on. And there's no penalty, there's no compensation, nothing happens. So the technology exists, but the problem is not identifying where there's a disruption, but what happens after the fact. Who is held responsible and how do people get compensated where critical infrastructure is damaged or vandalized? That is where the more work still needs to be done.
Mr. Lojade, don't you think that other sectors need to take a leaf from the telecom sector as regards protecting their critical infrastructure? It seems that, especially with this train tragedy, that we are closing the stables after the horses have bolted. Mm-hmm. The damage has already been done, and it is only now that we're thinking of protecting billions and billions worth of investment. Or should we be looking in the area of insurance?
Insurance will always have a role to play as far as risk management is concerned. But the two examples you gave are actually on two different sides of the coin. Telecoms is private sector driven. So when you put private sector money in a place, they want to see through their money.
They want to protect their money.
They want to protect their money. It's different from the attitude of what belongs to everybody belongs to nobody, which is what you see at the public sector side.
It's not my father's property.
It's not my father's property. So it is being able to do a bit of change of attitude in that space that could make them imbibe the private sector approach to looking at these things. At the same time, don't forget one of the constitutional clauses now has to do with the railway. And it is meant to bring in more participation of the private sector into that space. That might help a little bit because the private sector orientation and attitude is totally different from that of the public sector.
So sometimes I'm a little confused about how to approach some of these issues because, I have to admit, we're talking about something as critical infrastructure here, and it would seem like, there are all kinds of sides to the same issue that we're not looking at. But there was an issue you raised, Mr. Anamani, the other time about the divergence of approach to critical infrastructure. You talked about the fact that, some agency has laid some cables, for instance, and then another agency goes and digs up the cable, maybe deliberately or otherwise. Well, we'll come to him. I understand that we lost connection with him for a bit. So that issue of dichotomy of ideas of agencies of government that are supposed to get things done, it's a problem in my head. So there is, on the one hand, some agency that has done something that the other agency does not know about, and one destroys the other's job. What kind of harmonization do you think will help to ensure that what I'm doing as an agency is known to you and we plan it together so that I don't destroy something that you have done when we are both supposed to be working for the same purpose?
Those are addressed at the levels of either the regulator. If you look at the telecom spaces, NCC. Now, the specific example Nnamani referred to had to do with taxes. He spoke about how they were being taxed twice for the same thing and how that is leading to troubles. Now, that has to be discussed at the level of the tax agencies at the state and federal level and the NCC and these telecoms operators themselves so that they can straighten it out and know what is due and what is not due. Otherwise, telecom is also referred to as an economic infrastructure. It is so critical that a state that is chasing taxes and you destroy your telecom infrastructure or you are shut out of the telecom infrastructure, you have only shot yourself in the foot. That money you're chasing will not come. In fact, your economy will decline by virtue of the fact that your entire state is shut down from telecommunications. So the parties must work together. It is the only way forward. The state must realize that you cannot cripple this guy. Crippling them, you are only crippling yourself. So it is in working together they can fashion a common cause and align their goals. The goals is mutual prosperity. The states want to prosper, but it doesn't want to kill the telecoms to do so. The telecom want to prosper, but it shouldn't deny the state the taxes as well. How do we meet and do that? That is what this question is all about.
If we are to prioritize critical infrastructure, how will you prioritize it? And in what direction should we be looking at for prioritizing critical infrastructure and protection of the same? I'm asking against the backdrop of economic prosperity for the people, for the state, for the country. So if we're to prioritize, what would be your approach to it?
I will start by providing two quotes. One from the Orient, another from the West. There's a Chinese saying that says, if you want to grow rich, build a road first. Then you have FDR, oh no, it was actually, what's the name of this other guy? And what he said is, he said, America did not have good roads because it is rich. America is rich because it has good roads. These two quotations are underlying the criticality of infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you can't develop any environment. Now, what is infrastructure without security? Look at what is happening at the Kaduna axis. So we had a road, people cannot go on the road again. So people who could afford the train migrated onto the train. The train has been attacked. So the people using the train are not using the train currently. Or the number might have gone from 10 to 2. Can everybody migrate to the airlines? Even the airlines, they went to the airports, don't forget. So if there is no security, you cannot deploy infrastructure to the use it's meant to be deployed to. So you will not be able to reap the benefit that infrastructure is supposed to provide. So these two things go hand in hand. It is part of the nature of modern economic planning. As you're looking at that infrastructure, you must be looking at how do I protect it as well. That's why you see countries fashioning out laws specifically dedicated to infrastructure provision. They know they must have the infrastructure, but they also know that without the protection of the infrastructure, that infrastructure will not deliver on the promises that it holds.
Mr. Nnamani, okay, go ahead.
It seems that what you're saying is that even at the planning stage,
correct,
the protection of the infrastructure is in the picture.
Fantastic. That is how it works.
Yeah. But that doesn't seem to be our case here. We build all this infrastructure. Okay, look at Akmongmo, for instance. I mean, for years, for decades, boys have gone to that place just as you come down Echo Bridge and dig up potholes there so that you will slow down and buy stuff from them. And nothing has happened. Nobody has been arrested for it.
People have lived under those bridges.
They're still doing it. And think how much it costs to repair that road all the time. So how do we get this into normal practice in our nation, that as you are planning to build an infrastructure or to construct whatever word it is that you want to use, there's also in that planning the issue of its protection?
Correct. It starts from those structures I started with. There is an institutional framework, a legal framework, a funding framework. Now, at the legal framework side of things.
Sorry, before you even go on,
yes.
How do we get that framework into place? Are we going to lobby? Are we going to take that bill to the House? Or how do we arrive at it?
Well, if what Mr. Nnamani alluded to is already happening at the level of the NSA need to finish this policy document and present it to the National Assembly. Let us pass it into a law. This thing will define...
That is for telecoms. What about the other areas?
Oh, okay. If that is just for telecoms, then that's unfortunate, because we need a comprehensive... What we need is infrastructure, not just telecoms. So these are the kind of things that will have defined the fact that you cannot fry puff-puff under a Akpongpong Bridge. It will have told you that. So the local government is not confused. There's no confusion that the local government will say, oh, you can be here, I will collect 500 naira from you every day. You can, these are all areas of confusion. So the local government was collecting rent with stuff from these guys because there is nothing that says it cannot do so. And at the end of the day, the bridge is damaged. All the rent it has collected and the one he intends to collect for the next 50 years cannot fix that bridge. So at the level of the law will have set out exactly what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And there is clarity on that.
So who pursues the issue of getting that into law? Who is going to work on that law?
All the parties could do that. Under our constitution, the executive can do it. So the office of the NSA, which is currently working on the communication side of things, could decide to expand what it is and make a case for this and sponsor a bill to the National Assembly. A citizen could sponsor a bill. So you or myself, I'm interested in this enough and I feel strongly about it. We can raise some funds from other interested people and sponsor a bill to the National Assembly. The National Assembly in itself can look at what is going on. I saw the way they were debating this matter in the House when it happened. Some passion went under the table. Can we translate the passion, into enacting an enabling law that will help to cure most of this situation that we are finding ourselves in? Let's let the National Assembly translate that. That's what they're hired for, to make the laws.
Mr. Namani, let's speak to, a question I was trying to raise with you earlier based on something that you had mentioned about interagency collaboration that could help forestall willful or unwillful destruction of critical infrastructure. What would be your suggestions along that line? We've heard Mr. Olojede, you may have heard him as well, but what would be your take on how to ensure that those willful or unwillful destruction of critical infrastructure are forestalled?
The key point, just following up on the last speaker's comment, is we need to realize that actually some of our youthful people who are involved in this can actually be alternatively gainfully employed if they are properly trained, especially in ICT areas. ICT has become a very, very important area that within a 6-month window, somebody that does not know how to code, develop app, and the rest of it can be well trained that this can be something they can even handle projects from outside the country and in foreign currency while sitting in Nigeria. So there is a lot of enlightenment we are doing, trying to expose the youths to ICT training, because we feel that once people are gainfully employed or are busy with creative aspect of life, there will be less incentive for them to be involved in some of these nefarious activities. So gainful employment is key. Just to start changing the orientation of how people actually think around some of this. So that is one of the area. The second and also equally important part, which probably goes into the question you were talking about, what do we prioritize as a nation? Clearly, security is it, as was rightly said. Even if you have the roads, but nobody can fly on it because somebody is standing there with an AK-47 waiting to blow up your head. The road is as good as empty at that point in time. So security becomes also extremely essential. But you must also understand that for many years now, we've still not been able to address issue of power supply. We are looking at a time bomb that quietly, I don't know if people are aware, but this situation about the fuel, diesel, and the rest of it is a time bomb that may soon explode if it is not addressed. The fact that we still don't have very good and functional refineries, where we still have to import product that we generate in raw form into the country at a very high cost and with all the challenges involved in distribution, is a challenge. So these are not something we don't know. reality is that we can sit here and list all our problems till tomorrow. The main point now is, what is the will? How willing are the key stakeholders ready to start addressing these issues? And I do believe they can be addressed. I don't think the challenge we face today as a nation is insurmountable. I honestly don't think so. I actually think the solutions, if we have the will to address it, is much more available to us than sometimes we tend to believe. So the answer to your question is, we need to train our people, but not just train them to be aware that you should not vandalize infrastructure, but let's actually give them alternative source of income. And those sources do exist. People just need to start having a different value system and how they see life and how things need to be approached.
Mr. Namani, I would like you to tell that to the boy who is selling pure water on the bridge, who probably sells about, let's say 2,000 naira worth of pure water. And he gets an option to go and take some railings off a bridge to make some spoons, which he can sell for 5,000 naira. Of course, that will be a better option than standing on the road selling pure water, running between cars and risking his life.
The difference is that that same guy selling pure water on the bridge, the alternative for him is not really going to dig up this stuff to sell for 5,000, but within 6 months, he can actually earn 50 to 100,000 if he's trained in ICT. And that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to build more capacity, because ICT is easy to train, it's easy to learn. You know, I don't think these days you don't need to go through this traditional 4 years of training at a higher institution to be skilled in some of these technologies and skills. So we are pushing that because we feel that that is the alternative for these people. There is a better alternative, and the alternative is to be trained in not the long-term kind of training that people always think you need to go through JAM. No, because they don't have that opportunity. So there is a new paradigm shift that we all need to embrace. And for me, that is the solution. That is the easiest part for everyone.
I agree with you, Mr. Namani, but I just want to play devil's advocate. Remember that when Babatunde Fashola was governor in Lagos State, he tried to clear beggars and all these area boys off the streets. He had various vocational centers all over the state. They would clear them off the streets and take them there and try to teach them something. But a lot of them ran away because they didn't want to learn anything. They thought they would make more money on the street.
If that is the case, and believe me, I am all for give people the opportunity, but I'm also for, if you be given the opportunity and you choose the way of vice, then the full wrath of the law should come on you. It's as simple as that, because the truth is status quo is not sustainable. We can't have it any other way. This is not sustainable. So if people are given the chance, as you rightly said, provided all the opportunity to turn their lives around, and they still choose the ways of vice, by all means, let the law take its full course on such people. That's the only other way out of it.
We don't have enough correctional centers.
It's not as much as correctional centers per se, you know, because it's not taking people to jail and otherwise. But again, look, we have to be optimistic. We have to believe that things ultimately will change. I personally feel that people are beginning to feel the pressure of the things not moving on them much more than in the past. So you will be surprised that the area boy that was not ready to learn 10 years ago may be more amicable to it now, because he has actually seen that there may be no other option for him.
Indeed.
Well, let me step on that same conversation and back up to the Marwa government. He had the good boys and good girls. And he did a lot at the time. Before his government, there was a lot of insecurity in Lagos. There was a lot of area boys that were, they call them street urchins or whatever it is. And he did his bit to take them off of the roads, and they call them good boys and good girls. put them into vocational centers and the rest of it. And to a large extent, it would seem that things kind of tapered down. Now, where I'm going with this is the sustainability of that program. Perhaps that was the challenge. Because in subsequent governments before Fashola came on, it would seem like that program of the Marwa administration was not sustained. And consequently, things went down. So sustainability of some of these engagements is probably an issue that we want to also consider here. Not at the policy level now, but at the execution level. So it is one thing to have policies, and of course, you know that we have that replete in our environment. Let me ask you, first of all, Mr. Olojede, we've had cases in our country where there are policies, amazing policies, exceptional policies, and they have to, you mentioned one of them the other time, that the MAMSA of those days worked, but then it would seem like the child of MAMSA, the National Orientation Agency, has just gone, under and all of that. So sustainability of some of these critical infrastructure protection policies is another thing that I think you need to speak to.
Generally, we have a problem with sustainability. And that is because we tend to think, at the leadership level, we think in 4-year cycles, which is the election cycle of a particular government. And that has implications for sustainability. Until we adopt what looks more like a vision approach to leadership, in which a leader is not looking at 4 years or max 8 years if it's a fresh election, but is thinking in 20 years kind of time. I've seen visionary documents even for counties in some parts of the world in which a county sit down, call its stakeholders, and say, this is what we intend to be, where we intend to be in 10 years, in this area, in that area, in that area. And even when the guy that's championed the vision has left and another person is in place, he knows that that is what the community wants, and they go along with it. But once we think in this cycle, it doesn't work. So what we need to adopt an approach that sees further, and for which the leaders, upcoming leaders, are committed. I'll give you an example. In Lagos State, there were a lot of projects that were abandoned by the government before the current ones. And some of the stories out there was that, the guy did not like the guy before him and all of that, so anything he touches, I'm not going to touch it. And we have that in several states and even at the federal government level in certain instances. One of the things I will give to this government was the fact that it completed a lot of projects that were started before it. Most of these rails that were celebrated were not started by this administration, apart from the Lagos Ibadan. They were started by a previous administration, and they were completed. Some of the road projects were in the same manner. Even the airport terminal that was recently commissioned was not started by this administration, but it went ahead to complete it. So we need that kind of attitude to our projects, to our policies, so that sustainability can be enhanced. One other thing that enhances sustainability is also the law. In certain instances, you need the law to guide the people or to force their hands to behave in certain ways. And if we need laws or amendment to existing laws to ensure that people will behave in a certain way, what are we waiting for?
So you think we can legislate sustainability?
It's not everything you can legislate, but you can legislate some aspect of it, yes. For example, I might say a project that is half done by a previous administration must be assessed for viability and sustained and completed by the incoming government. I can legislate that.
Mr. Olojede, let me also add that those two governors you spoke about belonged to the same party. Just imagine if they belonged to different parties. What would have been the case?
Meanwhile, the federal government, the previous federal government belonged to an opposing party from this current one, and they completed each other. So it's not really about parties, it's about leadership.
It's about leadership.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Naman, do you agree that we can or should legislate sustainability?
Absolutely, we should. We should learn from our mistakes, and our mistakes is that if it's not legislated, people by default would not want to, especially if they feel, oh, if I complete this, the previous people may take the glory. Let me start something from scratch, and then you have a lot of abandoned projects. So if you legislate it, two things happens. One is a government that comes in and you probably feel you have 4 years. You should only implement projects that you know you will complete within your tenure. Now, there are some long-term projects that you must start and expect that the next one will complete, even if it's you or not you. But at least let 80% of the projects be those ones you know you can conveniently complete, deliver on it, so that it does not become abandoned project. That is number one. That does not even need any registration. It's just people saying, hey, we want to focus on projects that we can truly complete and deliver, given the resources available to us. The second one are for long-term projects. No country truly develops based on only short-term projects. There are some projects that take upwards of 5-10 years to complete. For those ones, we need to be realistic about it. It's unfortunate, really, that we are where we are. But if there's anything which I've said over and over again, is this realization that status quo cannot continue. There's got to be a paradigm shift. We have to do things differently than we've done it in the past. If not, things are likely going to get from bad to worse, and none of us as Nigerians wish that for ourselves or for our country. So sometimes something good comes out of a bad situation. My hope and prayer is that, given the current state of hardship in the country, insecurity and everything, I can assure you neither the current government or even the opposition government is happy with the state of play, because we are all citizens, we are all going through it. No matter who you are, no matter which part of the state or the country you live in, we are all understanding that we have to change the way we do things in the country. And my hope is that this will spur in us the will to change and just try to do things right.
Mr. Namani, don't you think that legislating, what we're talking about, would be easier if we had a vision? We had all agreed this is the direction we want Nigeria to go, and this is where we want to be in the next 10, 20 years.
That is mostly possible if you have a one-party state that is guaranteed to remain in office for a long time. In a democracy like the one we have, where there is a possibility that a different party with a different agenda or policy come into play after 8 years, then it becomes much more difficult to have this kind of plan.
Perhaps then it questions, just a moment, Mr. Namani. Perhaps that questions our collective ownership of the entity called Nigeria. India is a democracy. The United States of America is a democracy. And there are quite a number of democracies like that all over the world. So I'm wondering where that position, that what you have suggested, of course I understand what you are talking about. Do we have a different kind of head?
No, I was just going to say, and that was the point I was going to get at, that at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, it depends on who is the leader at any point in time. The leader is the one that will say, hey, I want to drive this policy, and I feel it's good for my people, and I want to use everything within my authority as the leader to pull everybody along and make sure we all work in the same direction to achieve this goal. And if it's clear to everybody and everybody sees the benefit, and let's be realistic, you're never going to get 100% agreement in everything. It's not done, globally. So, but as long as most people key into that vision, most people subscribe to it and work towards it, then it is achievable as a people. But at the end, there must be a leader that pulls us and drives us in that
Mr. Namani, you have just said what I was going to say, that if most Nigerians have bought into that vision, and this vision is adopted, it becomes a national vision, it should not then matter which party is in power or which person is in power. This vision is a Nigerian vision. And it now behoves on that leader to just take us in that direction, take us in that same train, in that direction, to that destination which we have all chosen for ourselves.
Let me quickly add something. If you observe, Biden recently is talking about an infrastructure bill. Now, America is backward in infrastructure relative to its position some 20, 40 years ago. So there's this $1 trillion infrastructure plan. It's going to be passed into a law. He has gone into his own National Assembly to lobby both major parties and even the independent, whoever you are, to say, look, this is where we are going. So it is going to be a law. Nobody, even if he leaves tomorrow and the next president is a Republican, there is an infrastructure law that is on the table. You go with it. So there is a place of legislation in some of this thing. There's a role for legislation.
But then there's also a place for planning.
Without planning,
However, it now depends on how stricto sensu we choose to go with that law, with that plan. How many rolling plans have we had in this country that have
Vision 2000,
Vision 2020?
That's a lot recent. That's a lot recent. I think the first plan, the first national development plan that I saw dates back into the 50s. Even before the Nigeria's independence,
Yeah.
you know. So I'm wondering where all of that is going to go. Okay, well, we're running off now, you know, about on this conversation. So, Mr. Olojede, speak to three categories now. The people, where these infrastructure are domesticated in different parts of the world. The subnational, which is the government at the state level, and the states, you know, I beg your pardon, and the federal government, both their agencies, ministries, departments that need to interface with states, that need to interface with their citizens on this infrastructure protection.
Well, the starting point is the guiding rules. What are the rules of the games? So we must get it right at the level of the institutional framework, the legal framework. The legal framework is so important because it helps with a lot of guidance on how to behave, even at the state and at the citizens level. It will tell you what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is an infrastructure, what is not. So when we put all of that in place, it becomes easy. The rest is now mainly in the space of citizens' education or public awareness, in which you let everybody be carried along that this is what we're doing, this is the reason we're doing it, you have a role, this is your role.
Okay. Mr. Anamani.
Similar ways. One, as a private sector people, we've realized that there's no way we can be successful without being good or being a good relationship with the host community. This is something some of us had to learn the hard way. So that is a given, and I think from the private sector side, it's a given that you must work closely with your host community, because the moment they see what you are doing as beneficial to them, either in the area of job creation, infrastructure development in their community, most times they protect it. We've seen that a lot, and I can give testimony that the host communities sometimes do work with you once they understand you are adding value to them. So we would encourage more of that. But the only place where we still need assistance is the government at the federal, state, and local level coming down to see some of these infrastructure developers as partners in progress. For some reason, because of the challenge in raising IGROs and funds, we seem to be working at a crossroad where you're trying to bring in investment, and before you even finish deploying the infrastructure, somebody is already looking at how to extort levies and tax from you to make it more difficult. So that needs to be addressed if we are to make progress. But more importantly, even the infrastructure that has been implemented, we need to use every available resource to the state, local, and federal government to protect it. Okay. If not, we keep losing investment. If not, the infrastructure will decay sooner than it ought to be. And that's just going to lead to problem for everybody. I'm optimistic that there's a bright future. Seriously, I believe that things can only get better for this country. I just have that feeling within me. And I hope we truly are able to move forward in due course as a nation.
So help me God. Ikechukwu Nnamani, President, Association of Telecommunication Companies of Nigeria, ATCON. Thank you so much for your time this morning, as well as Gbolahan Olojede, Executive Director, DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Thank you so much.
Pleasure this morning.
So we're back after now to take on the home stretch. Please stay with us.